Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Mo Gillen, Cullum number 43523. We'll hear about Mo's work from being a nuclear certified artillerist to her 2008 role as a spokesperson for the U.S. military forces in Iraq. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any government organization, most particularly the U.S. Army Recruiting Command. Mo Gillen, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Paul LaFontaine. How are you?
Doing great. So I called you Mo. Your name is Mora. What did we call you at the academy? What was your nickname?
It was Mo.
There was
Mo has been my nickname from about the third grade.
One of the themes of the podcast is that we're really not happy with the fact that we were really unimaginative with our nicknames. So I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. No wrong answers. It's totally your preference. So I'm going to give you three alternate nicknames that we might switch you to, or of course, we'll just stick with Mo as D, right? So let's go ahead and we'll try these out for you. So A, Boomerang. B, Private Pickles. C, Bloop. Or D, but we still keep calling you Mo.
I definitely prefer Mo.
Okay.
Although Bloop, I could absolutely see as fitting.
What's your favorite part of being in the class, being class 86?
You. And each person that I have gotten to know, even though I might not have known you at school. I mean, each individual classmate has become so precious to me. And you and I work on the TAPS project together.
We do.
The people that I've met through my work with the Unity Call on Sunday nights. I didn't know Dan Rizzo at school, but he's a dear person to me now. Yeah.
So talk about the Unity Call. That's a great initiative. How did that come about, and what was the thinking there?
Yeah. You can go to the Facebook page and go back to when John Ponce was kind of talking about an incident that had occurred with one of his soldiers, someone he'd worked with previously. And I guess the story goes that he'd gotten a call that maybe this soldier, needed some assistance, and John reached out to him and probably thwarted a suicide. And John, kind of took that to mean that we need to be taking care of each other. And so he said, what if we had a phone call on Sunday nights for anybody who wanted to call in from the class? And I happened to have a, freeconferencecall.com account, and I threw it out there, and we just started. And that, I think, was probably 2 years ago. We rarely cancel it. Super Bowl Sunday, we sometimes cancel. Right. But there's a cohort of us that are there every Sunday night, and I'll put out, John used to do it. And then periodically somebody else will do it. But there's always a post on Facebook saying, hey, it's coming up at 9:00 Eastern. Here's the number. Here's the code. We're always there for anybody who wants to come in. And it's, hey, maybe you're grappling with something and could use some crowdsourcing from some trusted classmates. Sure. And sometimes it's just, join us for some goofy war stories about cadet days, similar to what you're pulling into this podcast now.
So let's go back to the early days. It's 1978 to 1982. Young Mo. What were you called in high school? Was it Mo or Mo. Was it Bloop? Okay.
No.
Mo. What West Point? What turned your head? Where were you from originally? I know
I'm from upstate New York.
You're from upstate New York.
Yeah. So West Point was somewhat familiar. My dad had thrown all five of us in the back of the station wagon, and we'd gone on a family trip to visit. I believe I also went to a football game with my Girl Scout troop.
Okay.
And it was sort of familiar. You talk about, 78 to 82. We were in a little bit of a recession, and I had this fear that I was going to go to a 4-year college and get a degree and not get a job. And I didn't know what a lieutenant did, but I knew he got paid. And right. That was sort of appealing in a pragmatic way. And my guidance counselor didn't think it was a good idea, but I persisted. And it was kind of funny. The thing that held me back was my eyes. My eyesight is not great, and I needed a waiver to get in, and I didn't get that until like the middle of June. And so when I got to West Point, they didn't have eyeglasses for me, so I was wearing my fancy civilian glasses.
Oh wow, you were very stylish for a new cadet.
Yeah, but I stood out. That was the problem.
What regiment were you in?
I was in H4. I was a happy hog. Okay, I was way back in the lost 50s.
I was in C4, and generally we knew everyone in the regiment.
Yeah.
So I remember knowing you as a plebe very tangentially, and that's why. So that's great.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
think guys knew girls. We there were only 100 of us or 110, whatever it
well, I
was.
think that
We
the
were easier to
guys
pick out.
all generally knew who the girls were. That's just the human condition, right?
Yep.
We can track all the female members of the class. The females have no idea who we are. That's probably you're probably better off
There's a
than
lot of that.
what. Did your dad drive you down and dropping off on our day? How was that experience?
So yeah, funny story there. It was my mom and dad. I don't know if my sisters and brothers were with us, but I recall being on that walkway as you go into Mikey Stadium,
Right.
and there was a Catholic brother in his robe and ropes, and my dad engaged him. He was all excited to talk about his daughter. Now, my maiden name is O'Brien. There's grew up sort of Irish Catholic, and my dad was just very excited that there was this support at West Point for Mo, and he really asked him to check in on me, and it made my dad feel much better. Well, fast forward whatever it was, 4 weeks later, and my roommate Pam Pearson and I are attempting to put together our uniforms. For some reason, our squad leader wanted to see if we could manage to put the marching uniform on, with all the brass and the
Right.
straps, sashes, and
Which
everything.
was quite confusing and overwhelming as new cadets. When later on, it was just
Yes.
automatic, right? But as new
So
cadets,
there's this knock on the door while we're completely stressed out, and it's
right.
this brother who has been sent by my dad to check on me.
No
And
kidding.
he comes in, he's just so warm and kind, and he sits on my bed, which totally freaked me out because you don't sit on a bed as a new cadet, especially a guy in a girl's room. I was freaking out.
Right. While you were
And I'm
trying
like,
to figure out which way the brass goes.
Dad, thanks a lot. It was funny.
And did he keep in touch?
I attended Holy Trinity Chapel when I could, and actually, somebody was saying that when cadets get to school, they lose their faith, or when college kids, when kids go off to college, they lose their faith. That was the opposite for me. I actually became much closer to my Catholic faith, and was actually fully joined the Catholic Church as a lieutenant.
Confirmation, right?
Confirmation. Thank you. Yeah.
Because I spent some time in Holy Trinity myself. Not so much as a religious reconversion or strengthening, but more as a place I could sit and not be yelled at for a minute.
Yeah. Now actually, one of my kids was baptized at Holy Trinity. Two of them were baptized at Holy Trinity, and one got her first communion there. So yeah, it became special to us when I came back.
We're going to skip ahead. We're going to come back to your upper class years, but in '94 you were stationed at the academy. Marketing.
I was in the admissions office, and I did what I called catalogs, posters, and videotapes. So it was all the marketing stuff, which now is no longer in admissions. It's across the way in the Taylor Hall. But
what was that like? Just going back and being an officer and being in the administration, and
no, it's such a great community. The West Point community for staff and faculty it's incredible. Kids soccer games, and first communion preparation, and just all the pieces of being on a military installation, but a very small one. It was a terrific, warm community. A great place to raise Army brats. And
right. And how many children did you have at the time?
So the third one was born actually at Keller.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. Same day as Lori Stoken's youngest was born, and actually mine was scheduled and hers was not. And we got there. I'm like waiting for my C-section, and I'm like, this is taking a while. I went, Lori went into labor, didn't she? So both our kids were born on the same day. Yeah.
Three children now. Where are they now, the children?
So our oldest, Mary, married to a firefighter in Stafford, Virginia, and our granddaughter is there with them. Got to see her this past weekend, and that's terrific. They live in a place called Aquia Harbor, surrounded by a bunch of Marines. It's a beautiful community down there. And then our son Henry and his wife Alexandria are about 20 minutes south of Mary and Joe, so they get to see each other all the time. We just don't get to see them as much. And then our youngest, Allie, is here with us and works in the community in the restaurant business and doing fairly well.
Now, you married a grad.
Yeah.
How did that transpire?
Well, I mean, the joke is that he was at that same football game that. Do you remember our last home football game when we were cadets? We were firsties, and it snowed And I
I
want to say
remember
it
a
was
few of
like
them like that. Yeah.
East Tennessee or somebody. And those poor guys were not dressed for the weather. And we
Right.
were out there ringing our cowbells. Hank apparently was at that same game because he was going to grad school at Cornell. He actually came back to West Point to teach in the foreign language department
Okay.
just after we graduated. But we did not meet each other then. We met at Fort Sill.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're both redlegs. And yeah,
So
he
let's go
actually
back
got out
to
in the 90s.
great. So upper class. So H4, you came out, had a smashingly successful plebe year, and then where did you go? What company did you go to as an upper class
I was in
person?
the F2 Zoo.
F2 Zoo. Okay.
Yeah, another great company. We had our moments, but a great bunch of folks, and it's always fun to be in that gender minority. There were only two of us in our year group, me and Liz Lind, who I love
Yeah.
dearly and haven't seen in a bunch of years, but shout out Liz. But you go through semester after semester where you're rooming with the same person. And so we mixed it up a little bit. One semester I was a cow, I think, and I lived with two yearlings. And then one of our
Oh, I
first
got you.
semesters, I actually lived with Robin Fontes, who was an E2. So, at the corner of Bradley, they just found a room that sort of intersected, and we were, sort of each within our company area. And, my running joke that summer when I was cadre for Beast, I lived with Miyako Newell, now Shaneling. Both of those women went on to be general officers. And I believe that I had a role, partly because, they built up some resilience putting up with me as
That's
a
always a
roommate.
great policy whenever one of your roommates goes on to great heights,
I'll take some credit.
is to just take a little bit of credit. So
Yeah.
my first,
So shout out to Robin and to Miyako as well, who was
my
my
beast roommate was Tim Knight, who became our first captain.
Yeah,
My
well done there.
first plebe roommate was Roger Carstens, who was our class president and went on to become an ambassador. My third
doing
roommate was
great
John
things now.
Greshner, who went on to become quite a famous agent in the FBI. So they're the variables, but I'm the constant in all that great.
I'm right there with you, Paul. Right there with you.
Hey.
I used to talk about when I was in high school, I worked at McDonald's. And, you always had to do all the videos about everything that we served. And I remember the filet of fish sandwich has a piece of cheese on it, which is designed to meld the flavors together. And I feel like in many cases, I have been that piece of cheese, for many situations. I'm not the tartar sauce. I'm not all that spicy. I'm not the meat of the sandwich, but I'm there and I make a difference.
Which maybe the nickname should be cheese melt.
Cheesy. I actually have a girlfriend of mine in my business and professional women calls me just that, cheesy.
Gee, there you go. So what did you do for fun as an upper class person? So we all had things that we pursued. You could go down the list. What was the thing that kept you kind of sane in a very busy environment?
There's a couple of answers to that one. It's a good question. So I was a member of the cadet band, which was great fun and got me off campus, fairly regularly, and that was great. That was really, really helpful. Kept me just changed my perspective regularly. There were other things that we did, sort of some goofball things. My grandmother lived just south of West Point, so I could actually get on the bus by the library and get off at her house. And Liz and I would kind of go down there periodically. But I actually had a sort of a challenging, I guess you'll call it a mental health challenge. I guess it was my yearling year. I wasn't doing very well, and there were things that had happened. We had lost John Todd, who I'd known at H4, and just it was a yucky semester. And I remember my TAC sending me up the stairs to the Cadet Counseling Center, and the first person I had was not great. I really didn't get anything out of that counseling. But then the next person I had was, I thought, worse. And she saw me on, I guess it was a Friday, and she's just like, I want you to spend time thinking about what it is you like to do.
Uh-huh.
And somewhat conveniently, I was on room tours that weekend. And so I was stuck in my room, and I was like, all right, this lady's wacky, but let me. And I pulled out some markers and started, kind of coloring in the calendars. Remember, we had those blank calendars. You had to write in all the dates. Right. And I did it in sort of a cool, graphic, colorful way. And I pulled out a sweater I had been knitting, and I finished it. And it was like this eye opener for me. I went, I need that creativity. I need, that color in my life. I need to be creating things. And it was an important life lesson. Tough to get to that point, but yeah.
Sure.
So in my first year when I was the training officer, I used to like posters, come to drill, and I'd have all these marching rabbits, like you had a
Thank
damn
goodness
choice
you.
about going to drill. But
You brought the only color to the place that it probably
I
had.
did.
Well, if you think about that story, you had a mood board before they were a thing, so you're really quite cutting edge.
Yeah, I guess so. And as it turned out, I think one of your other interviewees was talking about the organizational leadership major, and that was my major as well.
Yeah, Rich Pasco.
And
Yeah.
yes, and you learned about counseling, and those were some skills that I remember specifically coming back to me when I was a lieutenant, and they became important later on too. So.
It doesn't matter which line of work you go into, whether it's an Army officer or even in the civilian sector, that ability to intuit people's situation and to, counseling is a strong word, but the ability to just connect with people is a very, very powerful thing. And that's great. You got that. And to this day, you seem to carry a bit of that with you, right?
Yeah, I try. It's a skill that needs to be polished periodically.
Now, what branch did you end up settling in on?
Field artillery.
And what was the...
And I was one of the only ones who wanted to go. The rest of the women who were apportioned,
talk about that, because that's
sort of kicking and screaming.
The female cadets had a different path and different possibilities at the time, because they were... I was just talking to a cadet, a yearling, who is home on leave and it lives near me. And so I'm talking to her and her father, and she said that, her roommate's going infantry, and so they have a whole different set of possibilities. So the possibilities were limited, but you went field artillery. Talk about that.
I did. I always tell the story of being out there yearling summer at Buckner, and we went and we had that exposure to I think they were 105s, and just the piece that I thought was very cool was the Fire Direction Center, where they gave you a pencil that was red on one end and blue on the other, and you could compute accurate firing data. And I thought that was the bomb. And it's still, I was thinking about it the other day. One of my favorite words in the English language is how. And that red and blue pencil was the how. That, we could take information coming from the forward observers and turn it around and have the guns fire and hit the target. I just thought that was cool. And so I really wanted to go into the artillery. There were not a lot of great options for women in the artillery at the time, but
how did they handle that back in 1987? I guess did you have a limited number of assignments you could go to?
Yeah, we absolutely did, and you had to keep your eyes open and ears open and know what was going on. I actually just came across a letter that I wrote to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, the 3-star Desper, that I wrote as a lieutenant. I have no idea why I kept it, but kind of like, hey, sir, we've been trying, but tell us what's the real deal. So I was, when you went down to, was it South Odd, and you chose which branch, and then and then within FA you got to choose what location, and I had chosen Holland. And so I got to go to the Language Institute first, and that was great fun.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah. I roomed with, we got a house together.
What was the nature of the role that you needed language training?
So because I was going to Holland, I was going to a warhead detachment. And so we would own the warheads, and the missile main assemblies and everything else belonged to the Dutch. So it was very much a NATO unit. So we were sort of in support of the Dutch artillery. Yeah.
No kidding.
So, yeah, it was cool. That was
back when tactical nukes were a possibility. Those were good days.
Well, yeah, no. So I was in Lance, which is, doesn't exist in the inventory.
Yeah, I know.
You can
Those were good days. Back when the world was simpler.
It was different. It was different than it is now. But
did you get nuclear certified? How did that work?
Yeah. So my orders were for the 8th Field Artillery Detachment, which was fairly far north in Holland. And somehow at some point, Big Army said, oh, you got to go to the 23rd. And I was the one who had to kind of call a timeout and say, you can't send me to the 23rd because they're cannons and I need to be missiles because I'm a girl. And it was just
Right.
that sort of stupid stuff that you always had to be paying attention to. Not that I wouldn't have loved to go to cannons, but I knew the rules, and I was just going to get jerked around as soon as I got there. Same thing happened. I went out to the Language Institute, came back to Fort Sill to get the nuclear course, and stuff was going on. It was the Dakowitz rules about women in the service. People weren't
Right.
abiding by them, and all these women's orders were getting changed. And I remember me and one of my classmates went into the course director, who also happened to be a woman in the artillery, and we're like, ma'am, we don't know what's going on with orders, but if we don't get to our units now, we're going to get jerked around. And she's like, get out of here. And we just, it was a Friday afternoon. We were all going to like graduate on Monday or Tuesday or whatever. She's like, yeah, go. So you're just, it's not like it's a fight. It was just that sort of always having to know the rules, and be ahead of the game, which
But certainly was more
serves me
difficult
well, but
for you and your female colleagues, definitely more difficult. But I think we all were trying to navigate a very
of
complex
course.
system that had rules that we didn't really understand.
Right, right.
And
And
that,
then, big HRC, what was that? I ended up working in that black box later, and understood a little bit more about assignments. But
right.
yeah.
Now, your first assignment in Holland, in Northern Holland, and
Yeah.
did you stay for 5 years in Europe?
No, so I was there for I think two years plus, and then bumped up to the group headquarters, basically the battalion, to be the S1, which was a great job, and really enjoyed that. So that was Germany, and then at the 3 year mark, came back to the advanced course, and actually that's where I met Hank Gillen, class of '78.
You came in and you said, "I speak Dutch and no nuclear," and he said, "That's hot."
we we actually met through some mutual friends. There were a
Mhm.
bunch of '78 guys that were at Fort Sill at the time, and yeah, just kept ending up at the same parties and stuff. And
Right.
it was that drawdown era, and so he got out and moved to Houston to work in the oil and gas industry because he was a Russian linguist, and some of our companies were doing business in Russia, and I called Army and said, "Hey, I'd like to go do recruiting duty in Houston." And nobody asks for recruiting duty. That's just unheard of.
This is
And
why you were still active duty.
yeah, yeah. So the joke is he was not going to get out of it. I followed him to Houston, did recruiting as a second command, and then yeah, I stayed
And
on
how did
active
you
duty
find that? I
27
mean,
years.
that's such a mysterious world. It has all sorts of mythology around it. How did you find a recruiting command? Just what was your experience there?
It was one of my first experiences representing the Army in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And that same thing happened years later when I was the professor of military science at Drexel University. You learn how to speak English rather than speak Army when
Right.
you're engaging with high school guidance counselors. And yeah, so it started me actually on that path of talking to young people and bringing them into the Army. I had a stint in cadet command before I got to the ROTC. I did the admissions office at West Point. So a lot of my assignments were talking to young people and getting them to join the Army.
So
Yeah.
that was also during the drawdown. So that was after 91,
I stayed in.
after
Yep.
Desert Storm, and after everyone was, saying, "Hey, this is the end of war, the end of history, the end of
Yeah.
war," and all that. What was it like
As we
recruiting in
knew
that
it.
environment?
Um, yeah, I don't know that it was, I mean, people still viewed it as a dangerous business.
Mm-hmm.
I had some really good recruiters. For the most part, I had the right recruiters in the right places. I did have um, a couple of Hispanic, Spanish speaking, sort of dual language recruiters who were assigned in the Chinese part of town. That didn't work out very well.
Right.
But for the most part, yeah, we did fairly well. There were a couple of times where we, quote unquote, boxed, hit all of our targets in the same month, and that was really it was cool. I mean, recruiting is very objective. You got to hit your numbers, and there were
Right.
people who would skirt some of the rules to try to hit those numbers. That was tough. I had
But
more
the
than one
number's the
that I
number,
need
and
to.
then how you achieve it is this measure of your ethics and your
Yeah,
approach to your job, et cetera.
yeah,
It's tough
yeah.
business, right?
It was absolutely a tough business, but could be rewarding in its own way. And my previous command had been at Fort Sill, where I worked with drill sergeants. And I used to say, drill sergeants and recruiters are cut from the same cloth. Very, no bullshit. You can't tell me nothing, but loyal and hardworking. Yeah, I had some really great NCOs in both of those assignments.
Craziest recruiting story, just from what you can say. Obviously, not throwing anybody under the bus.
So one thing that happened more than once was if a young person in high school, disclosed on their paperwork that they had tried marijuana. There was that caveat for, one-time experimental use,
right.
but it had to be approved at the commander's level. So the recruiter would bring this young person in. The recruiter would be real proud about, it's just a one-time experimental use. And I would establish rapport and we'd be talking. And I'd ask the young person, like, okay, so how often was it? Was it every Friday night or was it, really just once in a while? It's like, no, it's pretty much every weekend. And I just look at the recruiter. I'm like, I'm sorry.
What?
That's not one-time experimental use. I mean, you establish that rapport, you start talking to the kids to tell you anything.
You were good with the potheads.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Talk.
Which the counseling, establishing rapport, you have unique skills.
Yeah, now, but it prevented anybody from getting through.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
An engineer who smoked too much marijuana, you could reach right in there, no problem.
Some of the Dutch soldiers were funny. We had this driver who had this long curly hair. I mean, much longer than mine. And he would park the vehicle, and before he would even chalk the thing, he would turn the rear view mirror so he could comb his hair. But they were conscripts. Everybody had to serve, and so we had a guy with a master in arts. We did.
Now, did you have to go back to West Point in recruiting, marketing, or how did that work?
So we were in Houston and looking for, what's my next assignment. And I knew that the work opportunity to come back to West Point had a graduate degree with it. And so I looked and didn't really want to teach, really was excited about admissions. I had done cadet public relations when I was a cadet. And so asked and was able to go to the University of Houston right there to get the master's degree, got an MBA with a marketing concentration. It really enjoyed it. Our son Henry was born just following the summer semester, going into the fall semester. I went and picked up most of my books while I was pregnant, had the kid, came back and picked up the rest of the books and went to class.
There you go. That's a good West Pointer mentality, right?
Get it done.
The books have to be picked up.
Yep.
Sorry, Henry. Just lay there for a second.
He was in a little carrier. He just went with me.
Fantastic. And so the marketing degree, did that turn your head at all? Did you get interested in business, or did you just really fill out existing interests?
Yeah, I really think it was sort of rounding out some things that were already percolating for me. Really enjoyed the MBA program. When you're on the Army's dime, you get to go full time and pay attention. And I was in with a bunch of students who were working, part time and trying to do everything on the side. I think the Army does it right that way. If you're going to get a degree, get a degree.
Right.
But then, in the admissions office, we earned some awards. There's actually the catalog for the bicentennial class, the class of 2002. Is that right? We grabbed an essay that, why am I blanking on his name? One of our classmates had written. The guy who wrote on golf. Oh my God!
I'm not familiar with that. That's my bad.
I'll have to go back and look. But one of our classmates had written an essay that showed up, I think, in what was then Assembly Magazine. And I really wanted to have that essay as the opener for the catalog. And I sent our photographer and graphic artists on this sort of almost a scavenger hunt to get some historic pieces that would go with, the piece that he'd written about Whistler, for example, being a West Point cadet. And they had such fun with it. And so we ended up with, I guess it was a 4-page spread in that particular catalog, because it was to recruit the bicentennial class, and got a national award for it. It was just great fun.
Now, see how it all comes together from that original mood board where you decided that you needed a little color in your life, all the way where you're designing catalogs for the academy. The whole thing had a big payoff.
Oh, absolutely. And we did a great redo of the classic video that we always used,
Right.
And that was a big renovation or redo, and had a lot of fun.
That's
Bringing
great.
some other people in on it, and yeah,
And how many years
good
total
fun.
did you serve?
27.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah. My joke
amazing.
is, as a lieutenant colonel, you can serve 28, and I sort of saw that, I wasn't going to make 06.
27 in, and you've had a variety of interesting jobs, one of which was going to Baghdad to be the
I was in the
basically in
media
charge of
operations center.
the operations center for PR, what I guess public affairs. Talk about
Oh,
that a
yeah.
little bit. That was
So
a
that was fun. I was a mock chief,
Mhm.
and there's the whole group of us that over a period of a couple of years. Those who served in mock chief positions. I was a day mock chief for the most part, covered the night shift for a couple of weeks at one point, and as chief of the mock, the media operations center, you were monitoring 11 different screens up front. 6 of them were in Arabic, and then the 5 international. Um, Looking at all the stories that were coming in and just checking, are they accurate? What's the tone? Who's saying something, and are we chasing it? But then also not just what was being said, already out there in the media, but then pushing out our press releases,
sure.
things that were being done, and worked with some great other public affairs professionals. Some of the folks in Navy public affairs were just terrific, and some National Guard units that kind of rotated through. They were on 6-month deployments, and some
Now
terrific
you were
people
there in
there.
2008 through 2009, and things were
Just to
heating
the
up a
beginning
little.
of 2009. So I was there. In fact, I redeployed the day we opened the new embassy compound. Yeah,
Things were
when
getting a
the
little
U.S.
heated
flag
over
went up.
there at that time, right?
Things got hot and then they got cool. There
Right.
were times when we were, sort of sleeping in the palace. I was in the not what do they call it, Alpha, but in the smaller palace in the embassy compound. And then, I was actually partly responsible for moving us out of that embassy compound, moving the media operations center into the new building in the new embassy. Um, yeah, and there were times that we were getting some incoming for a
Yeah.
pretty consistent couple of days. It was tough
Downrange.
doing
There you
casualty reports. Not
go.
a lot
Okay.
of fun.
No, not a lot of fun. And did
Yeah,
you did they have like a I guess talking points in that each of the mocks would look for
always.
the, how did that work in terms of I would say shaping the message, right?
Yeah, yeah. If you Google Mo Gillen or Mora Gillen, you'll see some of the things that I and that's said really what as we the were. Is, spokesperson whoever's on duty gets the call, and you review what your talking points are. One of the things that I thought we did really well, and I was pretty excited about it. I had been actually at the Human Resources Command, and had watched all my buddies deploying to Baghdad or Iraq, and wanted to take my turn, but kind of got thwarted in that until a couple of dominoes fell in the right direction, and I was able to get a YAS. Somebody else was on your podcast talking about the worldwide individual augmentation system, YAS.
Yeah,
When,
Bobby Bullard was talking about it.
yes, that
He implemented it. Yeah.
I I was a YAS task.
Really? There you
Yes.
go.
Yep. So an individual augmentee going to this media operations center, but knowing that I was going to go, I actually was able to take the State Department's public information course, and grabbed up a guy from Fourth ID in their public affairs office. He took the course with me, and we were, two Army people in State Department, and just really learned a lot. Got to know a lot of people. Got to make some connections, drink some tea, and then being in the embassy building, we were constantly coordinating messages and who
Right.
was going to say, who was the most appropriate spokesperson. Was it the ambassador? Was it General Petraeus? It was a really collegial, I guess, experience. Yeah, yeah.
Good for you. That's what a
That's fun.
fascinating experience. Coming
Still
back
have
from
have
there,
a have a great deal of respect for the State Department. Really,
right, right. The things that
super
they do,
hardworking people.
yeah, it's amazing. I had a very small slice of that in my own life in the corporate world where I was out uh, speaking on behalf of a company. And when you
Yeah.
take talking points of any type, and you have to stick to them, and then you get people in the hurly-burly of regular conversation or reporters trying to knock you off balance.
Yep.
It's a non-trivial task to be able to keep on message.
Well, and did you get some of that training? Because
I
that was
did go
something that
through
we got
training,
in our public
yeah, and I
affairs
really
course.
enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and
Yeah.
it led to a career in podcasting.
Beautiful. Love it.
It
Yep.
all turned out okay in the end.
Well, good.
27 years.
Good.
So what did you finish out as? What was your favorite of the last series of jobs? What job was really the most fun?
I think that what do they call that? The theory of recency. My last job was great.
Last job, what was that?
I was the professor of military science for the Drexel University Army ROTC program.
Okay.
Again, had some fantastic NCOs and just really, really good people and some terrific cadets. They were so impressive. Drexel is a school, right here in Philadelphia, sort of in the University City side, so not Center City, but on the west side of the Schuylkill River. But it's right there in the city, and it sort of the armory where we were was right in the heart of the university campus, and so there was always this buzz. There was always this stuff going on around, and Drexel is known for their co-op programs. So many of our cadets, had sort of a crazy system of they'd be on co-op for 2 quarters and then they come back to us for 2 quarters. I had a number of nurse cadets who would have their clinicals in the same quarter that they were, supposed to be in a leadership position as a cadet. And these people were very, very busy. I mean, you think cadets at West Point are busy. I would have put some of the Drexel ROTC students up against any of them. And they just made it work, and they cared about each other in a big way. One of the things I remember doing is we had to do land nav training at Fort Dix and, get on the buses and drive over. But you had to do both day land nav and night land nav.
Sure.
And so we would do the reverse training. We would go at 3:00 in the morning, do the night land nav, and then do the day and come back. I had students, not just from Drexel, but from LaSalle, St. Joe's, a couple of others. The Drexel students basically opened their dorm rooms for the LaSalle students to stay the night so that they could be guaranteed to get on the bus the next morning.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything that we did. It was just stuff that they did because they could figure it out,
Right.
Yeah, they were good.
A very formative but important lesson that they'll
I was so impressed.
Them. Yeah. That's
really
impressed. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's
it was fun.
What a fascinating career. I mean, all the way. And then did you change, I'm just curious, did you change branches? Did you?
No.
You were
so I picked up public affairs 46 as a secondary, my functional area.
Okay, gotcha.
But kept those cross cannons on my collar for the whole time.
Good for you. And then
you're
in Philadelphia area now. What keeps you busy now?
So when I retired, I went to work full-time in the nonprofit world at the Veterans Multi-Service Center, which I loved. And I did that for 3 years, but for family reasons, decided I really couldn't work full-time anymore. So I've had a series of part-time gigs, did some work for the Census Bureau, which was great fun, especially during COVID. Did a couple of other jobs, worked at the AAA in town because it was nearby. I could walk there, and I planned vacations. That was fun. But my current gig is actually with an insurance company, a very small company, and I, get on my city bus and I get off in front of the office, and have throttled back actually on those hours because I have started law school. So just Monday night, took my first exam for my first class. I had a summer class in contracts, and hoping to have gotten a B, might be a B minus, don't know.
A late in life lawyer.
Yeah. Crazy.
And what type of law do you think you're aiming at, or what was the thinking in terms of?
Don't know yet. I basically tell people I like to argue. So I think that, that advocacy thing is a calling. There have been some things that have happened in my life about, this house that we live in is 160 years old. It's in a historic district, and there are issues with how the township regulates historic properties. I had a friend who was incarcerated, and watching her go through her Post-Conviction Relief Act. There's just, stuff that I feel like I could help if I had that ESQ after my name. So,
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We'll keep close tabs on you because you have a lot of varied and interesting life experiences, and you'll certainly apply that to the type of law you go
thanks, Paul.
and do. I'm sure we won't see you on a billboard doing injury law, for example.
Probably not. No, although they make the bucks, and if I'm going to spend my retirement income on the
absolutely. 20 years ago, self. Think about that. 40-year-old Mo Bloop Gillen. What advice would you give yourself of 20 years ago?
I think at the age of 40, I was doing okay. My 40th birthday party, I took myself to Baltimore and had a bunch of good friends join me there. And I think just sort of reinforcing that, the idea of being kind to other people. I probably would have patted myself on the head and said, you need to be kind. The other thing I think is probably, forgiveness is a magical thing. And it's a lesson I keep relearning. I don't know why, I should just learn it. And I've gotten good at some really good apologies, but I just need to do it more often and realize we're all flawed. And let's care about each other and move on.
And there are words that you live to this day. The unity calls and just knowing you from the TAPS work we do together. And
I so appreciate that, Paul. I mean, really working with you and Joe in particular has been great. I do love that work. I love, interviewing the families of people I might or might not have known as a cadet, but hearing them tell the stories it's really an honor.
And I think for the audience at home, we should mention that you really are quite skilled at finding next of kin and finding people who initially were actually rumored to have not been interested in the process of helping, but suddenly now they're sending
with the right phone
letters
call.
And they're sending long emails and handwritten letters of logs of their loved ones. It's a pretty amazing thing, and I think I'm pretty sure if our 80-year-old selves were to come back and say 60, it'd be the advice would be take care of each other for this next 20 years. And I think I'm taking that advice ahead of time. So my 80-year-old.
Absolutely. You're doing a great job. I love seeing what you're doing.
Drink more vodka, maybe the 80-year-old. You're being too abstemious is my hope. Mo Gillen, thanks so much. It was such a pleasure. And really
I've enjoyed it, Paul.
On all the class stuff. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.